Thank you. The idea of founding an organization called Historians Without Borders had been germinating in my mind for a longer time, and I'm sure that many other people have had the same idea, but it was in Finland where we actually realized this idea in 2015, already more than 10 years ago, and it was based on my experience both as foreign minister and as a historian of how often history continued to play a role in current conflicts. And I'm not referring to contemporary history, what was going on at the time, but even very ancient history plays a role. We know that from India, where Hindu myths are very much part of the political scene in India and causing conflicts. But in Europe too, in the Western Balkans, I often ran into 1385, the Battle of Kosovo-Polia, which continued to be really a current currency in many places and countries. So, and we had many examples of how history was continued to be used to foster conflicts, stoke conflicts, and prevent conflict resolution, and make more difficulties for peace negotiations. And I started to ask, what could historians do to prevent this? Because historians, not many of them anyway, were party to these history conflicts. It was mostly politicians and the media who misused, abused history to foster conflicts and prevent conflict resolution. So the idea was to come together with historians and ask what can historians do to prevent this kind of misuse of history, and how could they contribute to conflict resolving and peace agreements. And this was the grand idea behind Historians Without Borders, and we founded after I had left office as foreign minister in 2015 in Helsinki at a meeting where we had very prominent members of our historic community and President Ahtisaari, our Nobel Peace Prize laureate, as one of the speakers, and because he also could provide many examples of how history had played a role, a negative role, in his work as a mediator in resolving conflicts. So Historians Without Borders was set up in 2015 as a Finnish NGO, but immediately we wanted to make this into an international initiative. And so we arranged the conference on the abuse of history in conflicts at the University of Helsinki 1 year later in 2016 with a grant we got from a Finnish private foundation and with the cooperation of the University of Helsinki, which provided the venue. We had about 300 historians from all over the world at the meeting, and among the speakers were President Ahtisaari, Margaret Macmillan, and Bernard Kouchner, chairman of the Médecins Sans Frontières, but also keenly interested in history. And at the end of the conference, we agreed on a declaration establishing the International Network of Historians Without Borders. And this network today has several hundreds of historians who have signed on to it, and all of you are very welcome to do so if you find the text of our declaration acceptable, and you can do that on the web. There are no fees or anything, it's just signaling that you accept the declaration. And in the declaration, I will read some points of it, wanting to promote and deepen the general understanding of history. I think this is an important point, because we are also living in what I call ahistorical times, meaning that people today have less knowledge and understanding of how and where from we have arrived where we are today. And that means that they cannot see into the future either, and it also lays them prey to the machinations of those who promote historical myths and the abuse of history. So I think this is a very pertinent point, and this is something which in my discussions with historians in other countries, I find is a problem almost everywhere, because history lessons have been cut in the school curricula, and history no longer is demanded, knowledge of history is no longer demanded in most university degrees, so you can get your university degree without being able to answer correctly to the question which countries were fighting each other in the First and Second World Wars. Even that kind of knowledge is disappearing, unfortunately. So this is one point. And calling on historians to diffuse conflicts by sharing knowledge and about history in conflict resolution processes, recognizing the role of historians in reconciling divergent views about historical events by promoting interactive dialogue between different interpretations of history, concerned about how insufficient historical knowledge and understanding leaves people vulnerable to the misuse of historical narratives and impedes their ability to see into the future, and emphasizing the need for concentrated efforts to counteract the misuse of history, and so on. And copies of our declaration are also available here. So please look at it, and if you have not joined our network already, please do so. You are very welcome to do so. And today we have actually several hundreds of historians from all around the world as members of our network. Of course, we are only a network. We are not an organization yet. And that is a problem because while our organization has been able to mobilize people in Finland and has met with very positive response in all the meetings I have had in historians around the world. Actually, I have had, and we have had, events and meetings with historians in about 30 countries, most European countries, Asian countries, Vietnam, China, India, and so on. Also in Africa, South Africa, Mozambique, Namibia, and in North America, the US. And everywhere the response has been overwhelmingly positive. So I think that the idea of creating an international organization of Historians Without Borders would be possible, but to do so we need a credible number of national organizations to form an international NGO. And so far we have only one organization called Historians Without Borders, which is the Finnish NGO, and we act as the secretariat for the international network of Historians Without Borders. The international network has a coordinating committee where we have as members Margaret Macmillan, Carl Bildt, my Swedish colleague as foreign minister. We have Jan Berends from Germany, Vasu Gounden from South Africa, Kristina Toomey from Australia, and Sergei Suraliev from Russia. Unfortunately, Sergei Suraliev has suspended his participation, and we will come into the reasons later in this discussion. But we are very much keen on arranging international contacts and international events. What we wanted to immediately do is to arrange a second international conference of Historians Without Borders. And we have managed to find several universities in Europe who would be willing to host such an event. The University of Vienna, of Salamanca, for example. But we need, of course, a great deal of finance to be able to arrange such a conference, and that has been our hindrance so far to do so. And of course, COVID also imposed restrictions on the work we were able to do. But even during COVID times, we have had internet discussions and meetings, both internationally and nationally. And Historians Without Borders in Finland has worked continuously with several projects, and perhaps one of our main ideas is the idea of a dialogue between historians in countries engaged in conflicts. And we have managed, actually, twice to bring together Ukrainian and Russian historians in Finland. Of course, they were unable to agree on much, except for one thing, which was that they asked us to continue this kind of facilitating the dialogue. But even that, of course, is in today's conditions impossible. However, we have had indications from both sides that once the situation changes, they would want us to continue this kind of facilitating. And this kind of historical narrative, dialogues between the historical narratives is something which we have tried to promote also elsewhere. And the idea is that bringing historians from countries engaged in historical or other conflicts with each other to sit down at the table and begin by listening to each other's narrative first. You don't have to agree with it, you can contest it, but you have to know it and you have to recognize it, because that is the first step towards trying to build a common understanding of history. And I think that as facilitators of this kind of historical dialogues, Finnish historians are better placed than most others, because fortunately we have had no history battles to conduct any longer, neither domestically or with our neighboring countries. Even with Russia, during the Soviet period, we already started historical dialogues and cooperation between Finnish and Soviet historians. Of course, in today's under today's conditions, this is no longer either possible. And of course, the situation of historians in Russia is very dire today, and we cannot continue with this kind of. But and while already during the Soviet period, we were able to put behind various different historical interpretations. There may have been, of course, different viewpoints and approaches, but there were no historic battles to conduct with Russians. But again, today the situation has changed, and we have, for example, examples of how the discovery of mass burials from the 1940s, 1930s in Eastern Karelia, which uncontestably are result of Stalin's purges, and mostly they were Finns, ethnical Finns, who were victims of these purges in Eastern Karelia. But today we have some historians in Russia and some officials in Russia presenting these as examples of Finnish war crimes committed against Russians during the Second World War. Now, the Finnish conduct during the Second World War was not without reproach, but we have dealt with it quite openly, so that no open issues, at least for us, remain. And with real historians, no issues remain with Russia as either, but Russian politicians and the Russian government and administration are a different story today. But we are not in a unique position. We know that all other neighboring countries with Russia have similar difficulties today with history, because Russia is the one country which is sorely lacking in this kind of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which openly addresses the difficult and awful parts of its own history. This is no longer possible in Russia. And that is why actually there is a growing diaspora of historians living in the Nordic countries, the Baltic countries, and other European countries who are in de facto exile. Some of them may even have refugee status, but that they are a small minority. But the main part is historians who no longer can conduct open and honest historical work in their own country, and therefore have been forced to enter into diaspora. And we have initiated a program called History in Exile, bringing together Russian historians in exile and talking in closed sessions with them but also having some open dialogue, open sessions about the use and abuse of history in Russia and how Russia deals with the history, but sharing this mostly the most important things in confidential closed meetings with these Russian diaspora historians. And we had meetings in Helsinki, Stockholm, Tallinn, and Potsdam and Berlin with these historians. And we have been fortunate to get funding from the Nordic Council of Ministers for this project. We have actually twice received funding for this project, which will be completed this year, and we will publish a report, full report, and also hopefully a book with some articles on the subjects which we have covered in our meetings. So this will be one of the most important projects which we are conducting today. And we have, in our own country, of course, in Finland, almost monthly at least, some meetings, events, book publications, discussions on books, film presentations and discussions about the subject of these films afterwards, and separate seminars, both online and physically, face-to-face seminars. But we have also worked internationally, and we have had several meetings in Germany, in Berlin, Frankfurt, and other places. And we have had also twice had the occasion to meet with historians in South Africa. In 2017, we organized a seminar in Johannesburg with the University of Johannesburg on how to write colonial history. And I was referring to this idea that we have had, that perhaps we could start an international project bringing together historians from both former colonies and colonial powers on how to write colonial history. But the difficulty is to find funding for such a project, and funding remains our main restraint in anything that we are doing. But we have a very active working group on colonial history, and we have now initiated also, apart from having, as I mentioned, meetings and discussions on subjects of colonial history, both more global from colonial history, but also on Finnish involvement in colonial. We do not have a colonial history because we are never a colonial power, although some people in Finland may have wanted to become one, but never succeeded in that. But we do have, we have, of course, like other countries, not engaged directly in colonialism, benefited from the economic advantages that colonialism has brought. And we were parties, of course, in facilitating with the exports, the slave trade and other items. But more closely, we were involved with colonizing our own periphery, the Lapland North, where we have the only indigenous population in Europe, the Sami people, both found in Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Russia as well. And the treatment of the Sami minority has not been without reproach, on the contrary. And we had already some years ago a seminar on looking into the experiences of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, which we have had not only in South Africa but also in Colombia and many other places. And we supported initiating such a project also in Finland, which has now actually taken place. And for 2 years, a commission, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, established by the government of Finland and the Sami Parliament, which is the representative of the Sami minority people, together established this commission, and it has published now its reports just a few weeks ago. And we will arrange a series of meetings to discuss these findings, not only in Finland, but also with representatives from Norway and Sweden, where similar commissions have been at work, covering the treatment of the Sami population. So I would say that, well, these are not a complete list of projects we are ongoing, we are having in Finland. And actually, there is very little limitations to what we would like to do. I would say that our ambitions run out our financial resources, because we are a very small organization. We have only one permanent employee. Our new Secretary General, Mikael Inanen, is over there here today, beginning his work as our Secretary General. And we have a part-time secretary for the project with History in Exile. But otherwise, we are dependent on the volunteer contributions from our members, board members and others. But I would say that we are fortunate that we can mobilize more or less all the intellectual resources we need. Because when we approach anyone, either in Finland or internationally, to join in a project or an event, almost everyone has done so without asking for financing for that. I would say that we are in a position that we could do much more if we had the financial resources. But unfortunately, we are not the only NGO in Finland which is today suffering from the cuts imposed by the government. I would indeed say that there are other organizations who are even in a more dire position than we are in Finland. We managed to get a small grant from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs last year, and we hope to have a similar grant this year. But otherwise, we are dependent on private foundations for our projects. And also, we have approached several international foundations for asking for support for our work, and to manage to arrange the second international conference of Historians Without Borders. But and I have had meetings with international foundations, Germany, Sweden, the US, and I would again say that what we have presented has been very positively met and agreed with. There's no disagreement with our aims. But it seems that the threshold to finance a Finnish NGO is rather high. So, and before we become a real international non-governmental organization, I think it will be progressively more, continue to be difficult to find international funding for our project. But we are very fortunate to have a good partnership with the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, which has been generously supporting our work, not only the arrangement of this event today, but also previously in Potsdam and also otherwise. So we are working also on discussion with historians in other countries. Would they be interested and see the possibility for establishing, not necessarily with the same name, Historians Without Borders, but if they would be welcome, would be ready to found an organization with the same aims and principles, which could become founding members of an international organization. And we have had meetings and talks with Swedish, Estonian, Spanish, German historians, and we hope today also to use this event to create interest in the UK for establishing perhaps a branch of the Historians Without Borders. Because before we have a credible number of national organizations, branches, say 10 to 12, we cannot be a credible international organization either. So we will continue as an international network until that day. But we hope that that day will come soon and that we can arrange the second international conference. I mentioned this event in South Africa in 2017. Also in October, we were visiting South Africa and Namibia and talking with historians there. Again, although we lack our own funding, we have some support from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Finland, and they were able to finance these meetings in Namibia and South Africa recently. But that is only a small part of what we would like to be doing. And as far as our resources allow, we will answer any invitations to give a presentation of Historians Without Borders or the work that we are doing anywhere. So I hope that I have now covered most of the items of what we are doing and what we hope to be doing in Finland and internationally. And so I'm very much looking forward to discussing and taking on board ideas and proposals that you may have on what we could and should be doing in the future. Thank you very much.